Welcome to the Creative Cows DSLR Essentials podcast. I'm Robbie Carmen.
And I'm Rich Harrington.
You know, Rich, in our last episode, we took a look at fixing underexposed clips. We took a look at using the three-way color corrector in Final Cut Pro. We jumped over to Premiere to use a few tools. In this episode, we want to take a look at overexposed clips, sort of the bane of my existence, if you will. When I see an overexposed clip, I sometimes just cringe.
Yeah, because it's going to be hard to fix. You know, obviously the problem is the information's blown out.
Yep.
All hope is not lost, but you sort of have to approach it with a slightly different tact than you did with the underexposed.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about the information. Once things start getting blown out, things move to white, there's just no information there necessarily to pull back. So I often think of super overexposed clips as sort of, yes, you can fix them, but it's kind of like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole, you know?
So we're looking at the shot here, and you know, this is, we're shooting a bunch of underwater sea animals through a glass tank. There's hot sun above, there's shadowy areas down below.
Yep.
This is a problematic clip.
In this particular clip, I think that we can get it looking a whole lot better. So you want to give it a go?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to do the same thing here that we did on
Save the narwhal.
Yes, exactly. We're going to do the same thing we did here on the underexposed clip. I'll just double click on it and let's load it up into the viewer.
Actually, I think it's a manatee.
It's manatee, I think you're right. You know your animals. And so I'm going to come up to video filters and then color correction, and let's again use the color corrector three-way. Now before I start working on this clip, just take a look at the waveform monitor, and what you should notice is that there's a whole bunch of trace over 100% indicating the overexposed nature of this clip.
And the blacks are hanging around 40 or 50, right?
Yeah, I mean that's contributing to sort of this washed out gray look on the clip, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing we want to do is come into the whites contrast slider and drag down so our trace is just below 100%, because after all, it is really bright. There's that, you know, that
There's
sun.
still going to be blowout, but it doesn't look overwhelming anymore.
Exactly. So we've also made the added fix, and now it's technically legal for broadcast, right? Because we brought that trace down below 100%. Now let's come into the blacks contrast slider and drag down quite a bit until I restore a lot of that depth. Now you're
what
saying,
you've really done with those two sliders, you basically sort of rubber band and pulled them.
That's what, you know, to be honest with you, people ask me all the time, you know, as a colorist, so like, well, it's all about color correction. I would say, you know, color, of course, but probably 85% of my job is contrast adjustment.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised when a client comes into the suite and they're like, oh, we really want to make this pop. And I go, okay, white's up here, push blacks down a little bit.
It looks beautiful.
Exactly, you know?
What'd you do?
And contrast,
Nothing.
and contrast adjustment is a lot of what you do to fix clips. Now, I pulled those blacks down pretty excessively, so let's just come back up into our midtones here and drag up just to restore some of the midtone detail.
And so what we're seeing there is the blacks are still sort of towards the bottom, the whites are up top, but that larger concentration of trace in the middle has started to shift up.
Exactly. Now the thing about this is, anytime you're color correcting, again, remember I said that there's an overlapping nature of the tonal range. You're going to find yourself as you make one correction, you know, an example, I adjusted the midtones up here quite a bit. You might come back to the blacks now and adjust down, you know, a click or two to restore some black. So there's a little bit of back and forth. And as you ever walk into a professional color suite, that's one of the reasons that colorists use control surfaces with tactile controls, so they can do two things at once rather than having to go click, click, click,
I
click.
thought it was just because they like to pilot the Starship
Well,
Enterprise.
it does kind of look like, you know, the Starship Enterprise, yeah. But you can see if I toggle this on and off real quick, here's the beginning clip.
Yeah.
Obviously super overexposed, kind of washed out. Turn that on. And, you know, again, it's not perfect. We still have that area of white up here on the animal that's kind of blown out. But we've restored a lot of depth to it. It doesn't have that overall washed out look. And it's also legal for broadcast now.
And remember, back when we talked a few episodes ago about using ND or filters.
Perfect use of one.
This would be a good use of ND here to compensate for sort of those highlights. You know, and it gets difficult. But I think the lesson learned here is if you are faced with a choice, and your choice is, well, obviously the first choice is get more lights. But if that's not a choice, and the choice is, do I overexpose or do I underexpose, you're going to tell people,
underexposed, slight underexposure. I mean, I don't want something that is going to be just completely black, because that has the same problem almost as, you know, as overexposed. I mean, the other issue here too is that you have to understand that with these cameras, even though they're producing beautiful high def imagery, there are some limitations when it comes to color correction, right? We're working with, you know, H.264 or Photo JPEG codecs that their color science just don't carry a lot of information when it comes to color, and the compression adds to issues like noise and all that kind of stuff.
So you can get around that by either transcoding your footage for certain apps, or if you're working in, say, Premiere or After Effects where it doesn't really have a sequence codec, you could set your sequence to 16-bit or maximum render quality, and that'll give you more headroom, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. So cool.
Good. So I hope that gives you guys some ideas. The lesson learned here is if you're faced with the overexposure sort of tug of war, favor slight underexposure. You could fix both, and I think the other thing learned here today is don't write off a shot as bad until you actually put it on the computer and see what you could do with it.
Yeah, and more importantly, just besides the computer, as I'm sounding like a broken record here, but until you view it on a calibrated broadcast monitor, because something might look wonderful here or terrible here or whatever the case may be, and it might be a totally different story on the calibrated monitor.
Great. Hope that made sense to all you guys today. Thanks for joining us for the Creative Cow DSLR Essentials podcast. My name's Rich Harrington.
And I'm Robbie Carmen.
Head on over to creativecow.net where there's tons of tutorials as well as a great magazine and a very active DSLR forum that you could check out for all sorts of news and information. Thanks again.